Hello everybody, and welcome to my third of 6 videos on the Pentax K-3 II. In this video we're going to look at how to use all of the features and functions behind these buttons. We're going to talk about what it is that they do and how they affect your photography. We're going to start off over here. We saw the play button before. We're going to talk first about the metering button. This is the button that you use to adjust your metering modes. This one here that looks like a grid. And so when you hold it down, using the rear command wheel, you can switch between metering modes. When it's green, that's your matrix metering mode or averaging meter, whatever you want to call it. It takes the entire scene into consideration, uses 86,000 data points from the scene to calculate the proper exposure, and then tells you what you need to do to get to that exposure. This is center weighted metering, and what that means is that, let's say you have an area about between my fingers, that's what's going to provide the majority of the metering data for the scene. So let's take a look at what that means. What you're looking at right now is the scene as it's being shot in matrix metering mode. So what it's doing is the camera is taking metering data from the entire scene and using that to create, a proper exposure. So I put these two objects in here so we can see a little bit about how they change, because it's hard to tell with a white background when the metering mode changes. And here we are with center weighted metering, and what you can see is now the pen and the flashlight and the whole scene got slightly brighter, and that's because the area in here is providing the majority of the exposure data, but the area around the periphery is still providing some exposure data to try to basically balance out the exposure slightly. Let's see what it looks like in spot metering. So here we are in spot metering mode, and what you can see is that this is significantly brighter than what we saw in either of the other two. Here is the purple pen and the blue flashlight, and they're really washed out. The black of the camera down here looks grayish, red, brown. This is really light. And what's happening is 100% of the metering data is being taken from the center spot. And that is resulting in the camera thinking that this should be gray right here. And so what happens is, in order to make this area gray, it really blows out the rest of the scene. Now, as you might have just seen, here's what happens when I put my hand in, which is significantly lighter than the camera. Everything is being metered off my finger now, which is now about a mid-tone gray. And that's how the different metering modes influence exposure. Over here we have the dial that switches from still to video. So video, back to still. Autofocus is a context-sensitive button. Ooh. And what it does is it has different functions that you can set in the menus, which we'll see in the next video, to operate differently depending on how you want it to operate. Over here, this is the auto exposure lock button, and what this allows you to do is, let's say you want to take a meter reading off this white space over here. Okay, so you hit auto exposure lock. Now you can recompose so that the whole camera then looks black, and then take your picture, and auto exposure lock will allow you to take a meter reading from some part of the frame and use it when you recompose without the meter automatically changing your image settings. Auto exposure lock is really useful if you're going to use anything except full manual mode. So let's take a look at these buttons right here. This is really where all the action is going to happen in interfacing with this camera in terms of getting it set up to take pictures. First thing let's look at is this top button right here. This is your shooting mode button. This brings up your shooting mode options. Now there's There's a series of 2 links in the video description below to a Pentax forums article that I wrote that looks at the different Pentax shooting modes, the drive modes. So if you want to learn a lot about how to use these creatively, check out those links. This first mode is single frame, and what single frame is every time you push the shutter release button, you're going to get 1 image. You could hold the shutter button down until the end of time, you will still only get 1 image. But if you push it down 3 times, you'll get 3 images. This next one is continuous shooting. Continuous shooting has 3 speeds. The speeds are low, medium, and high. Low shoots 3.2 frames per second, medium shoots 5.5, and high shoots 8.3. Now, that is until you run out of buffer space. If you're shooting RAW plus JPEG, that's not going to be all that long. If you're shooting just JPEG, and if you're shooting not full resolution JPEGs especially, that's going to be a very long time. And also, if you're shooting low speed, it's going to be even longer before you run out of buffer space. So it's a question of what do you need in terms of shutter speed. If you're shooting short bursts for sports, like your son's playing soccer and he's running up to the goal and he's going to kick a goal, and you need about 3.5 to 6 seconds of burst to capture him kicking the goal, high speed, and you're going to get 8.3 frames per second. That's ideal. But if you want to capture some slightly slower action, you could go with medium or low, or if you want to have a longer period before you run out of memory, medium or low. Self-timer, there are 2 self-timer modes, 12 seconds and 2 seconds. And what these mean is that after you push the shutter release button, it will either be 12 seconds or 2 seconds until your camera takes the picture. The remote control has 3 options. Standard, click the remote control and it takes a picture. Click the remote control and 3 seconds later it takes a picture. Or click a remote control and you will get continuous shooting. Continuous shooting, I believe, is the speed that you have set for your continuous shooting speed. Now, where this is really beneficial is if you're doing something like star trails, for instance, or a time lapse, and you have a bunch of 10 or 20 or 30 second exposures, or even a bunch of half-second exposures or whatever in a row, and you don't want any gaps between those exposures, because even with the star trails, if you have a 2-second gap between exposures, you can get little dots between the stars, or gaps between the stars. So what this does is allow you to take the first picture. All of your settings would have to be the same, and then just walk away, and every single time a picture is done, immediately another one will be taken, and you won't have that gap that comes with the later shooting mode, which is interval. And we'll see that interval shooting mode in a minute. Exposure bracketing mode has 3 standard with the self-timer or with the remote control. And so this works by having the self-timer countdown, and this works by starting it with the remote control. If you scroll down, you can use the front command wheel to change how many bracketed images you want. 3, 5. 3 is standard, 1 under the proper exposure, and 1 over. 5 is also standard, 2 that are underexposed, the proper, and then 2 that are overexposed. You could also do 2 exposures, 1 that's underexposed, or 1 that is overexposed. So that's with the front command wheel. With the back command wheel, you can adjust how much exposure distance is between them. So you can increase or decrease the bracketing amount. The minimum you can do, obviously, is 0.3, because anything less than that, and you won't be able to bracket because you're talking about the exact same exposure. So generally 2/3 to 1 1/3 is ideal for most situations. Mirror lockup shooting has 2 modes, standard mirror lockup and mirror lockup with the remote control. And I'll show you what's going on in here with mirror lockup when we take pictures with it. Alright, so let me show you what's going on here with mirror lockup. Now, mirror lockup's on. As you can see, the mirror's down. If you touch the shutter button once, the mirror pops up, but as you can see, the shutter is still closed. So let's hit it a second time, and now you can see the shutter is open and the sensor is exposed to light. So that's how mirror lockup works. You hit it once to lock up the mirror, hit it a second time to take the actual exposure. So let's take a look at, and it functions the same way with the remote control, only the remote control you're hitting the remote instead of the shutter button on the camera. Multiple exposure. So here are the different options. Standard multiple exposure continuous. Now with this, let's say you're going to take 3 shots. You'd have to hit the shutter button, click, click, click 3 times. With this, you'd hold it down and it would take 3 exposures, click, 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 automatically because it's in continuous mode. In self-timer multi-exposure, it would work, but with a self-timer. So click 12 seconds exposure, click 12 seconds exposure, and so on until you've taken all of the images in your multi-exposure. Here it is with a remote control. So remote control exposure until you've run through all of your images. So from the selection mode, you push down, and now you can go to select your number of shots. Anything up to 2,000, which is ludicrous. Really, honestly, anything much above about 4, and you're not going to be able to really tell what's going on in your image. There are some exceptions to that, but if you're trying to create a workable image with different things overlaying, if you go above 4, it's going to be really hard to get that. Multiple exposures beyond that are used for technical things like simulating smooth transfocus lens operation and so forth. Composite mode. Now I saved this part for last because it's a little bit complicated. There's a few different composite modes. Average. What that does is that takes the average of all of the data and creates the composite image. So let's say we're going to take 2 images in our multiple exposure. We're going to take this one right here, and then we're going to take this one where the whole scene is white. So what that would look like is we would take this frame, and then the white frame, and then everything that's black here would appear gray. The way that averaging works is that it takes every pixel and looks at their red, green, blue values, and then in each image adds them all up, divides them by the number of images, and comes up with an average rating for each pixel. That's why this is how you would want to do a picture if you wanted to have it look like somebody was a ghost. You have your model stand in a doorway, and then you take another picture of the doorway without your model, and now all of a sudden your model looks like a ghost. That's this mode. Great for Halloween. Additive. Additive basically takes all of your exposures and starts adding the exposure data until you reach white. Now what that means is that, let's say your red, green, blue here is 125, 125, 125 for all of this camera space. If you took 2 images, it wouldn't be 125 anymore. It'd be 250, be nearly white. And so what's happening is that it takes all of the image data and just adds it together to achieve the finished image, eventually reaching white. If you take enough pictures in composite mode additive, you will reach plain white at some point. So additive has some creative uses. For instance, additive is a really good way to take images of 2 different things and have them influence each other in strange ways. Anyway, this is one that's really worth playing around with to see what kind of creative effects you can achieve with it. The next one we're going to look at is bright. So what bright does is it takes the brightest part of the image and adds that. So let's say you had a composite image where you had somebody walking through your frame with a cell phone on and their face was illuminated. No matter how many pictures you took, as long as there was nothing brighter in that spot where they walked than them, they would always appear in it. So this is a really, really good creative mode for things like landscape and architecture photography. Architecture especially. One of my favorite photos from the K-3 earlier this year, I used it similarly to this. I took a picture of a sunset with a tree in the foreground and then a neighborhood, a whole bunch of residential houses in the background. left it there for a little while until all the street lights and house lights came on about half an hour, 45 minutes later. Took the second frame, and when they were blended together with bright compositing mode, the lights showed up, but only the lights from the houses, because they were all that was brighter in the frame than what was in the first frame. So what happened was I was able to achieve a look of having the sunset coloration and the tree and the shadows and the long clouds from the movement, as well as these nice points of light from the street lights and house windows. So this is a really powerful composite mode for some situations. Now we get back to average. Multiple exposure plus continuous. Oh wait, wrong way. Didn't go up high enough. Here we go. The next mode is interval shooting mode. And interval shooting mode is really good for taking a lot of pictures over and over. So if you wanted to do a time lapse, for instance, this is a really good way to do it. The interval is the interval between the exposures, not when the first exposure starts and then the first exposure ends and then the next exposure starts, but it's all on a timeline. So if, let's say that your interval, so let's say that your interval is 10 seconds, okay? And you're taking and this is your timeline, 0 seconds to 10 seconds, and you take a 5-second exposure. At 10 seconds, you'll take your next 5-second exposure. It's not 5-second exposure and then 10-second block before your next picture. It's not 15 seconds, it's 10 seconds with the exposure nestled in that. If you set your exposure for 25 seconds, then it will count through this 10 seconds twice before your next exposure, and you'll basically go through your number of shots very quickly. So the number of shots is how many times it's going to count through your interval time, and you can go up to 2,000 exposures, and starting it as now or setting it for a time in the future. So if you said, well, I'm going to set this up on my back patio or someplace safe where I know it's not going to get messed with, and I want to set it up now while I can do all of my framing, but I don't want it to take pictures until midnight because I want to capture a nice picture of some meteors or stars or whatever. Now you can set it to have a specific start time. Or just now means that after you exit out of this and hit the shutter button, it will start. Interval composite works in the same vein. Now we talked about the compositing modes, average, additive, and bright. What this does is this takes an interval shot, however many you want to set up, and it composites all of the frames into a single image. So this is a really easy way to do cloud motion blurs or star trails, for instance. The interval composite saves the process, or doesn't. Saving the process means that if you take 500 interval composite images, it will save each one of those 500 images. If you don't save the process, it will only save the last one. So it's a matter of, do you want to have the image appearing to morph and change, or do you want to have just the final image? Either way, you still get the final image. I like to save the process because if the final image loses too much detail or has too much, has much more of the effect than I wanted, I can go back to an earlier one and find one that I'm really looking, that has the amount of the effect that I'm looking for. All right, let's take a look at the white balance button right here. So here are the different white balances you can choose from. Now what white balance does is, you can see how right here in the video, this is all white. With different white balances, this would be different colors. So what I'll do is I'll go through here and I'll describe what the white balances would do in different settings. Auto white balance and multi-auto white balance, basically, those look at, auto white balance looks at your whole scene and determines how it needs to adjust the data from the sensor to achieve whites looking white. Multi-auto white balance looks at individual parts of the scene and determines how it's got to adjust the data coming from the sensor to make the whole scene look white. Daylight is for when you're in daylight, and you would assume that it assumes that you're in a daylight setting, and so it changes the color cast of your lighting to adjust for it having a full spectrum of light. Let's take a look in the video at what that would look like. This is what daylight white balance looks like inside underneath fluorescent lighting. You can see it makes it fairly warm. Shade white balance is what you would use in the shade, and shade tends to cause colors to shift over to the blue side of things. So let's take a look at what the lighting in here would look like with the white balance set to shade. To counteract blue, you need to add orange. This is what white balance when you're set to shade looks like if you're not in the shade. It makes things very orange. And actually, it can be a really nice warming effect for a scene or a video if you're trying, like, if you want to do the Michael Bay thing of, oh, let's make it feel really warm, and because it's like Bad Boys 5 or whatever they're going to make, and let's just slap an orange filter in front of the camera, and that'll make it feel really warm. That's one of the ways that directors in videos make movies feel warmer, is by putting a warming filter in front of the lens. This is a similar effect, setting it to shade, as doing that, only it's done in the camera. So the next one is cloudy. Cloudy is sort of like shade, only with significantly less of an effect. Clouds work as sort of a diffuser, and they add a little, they mute colors a little bit, add a little bit of gray blue to them. So let's take a look in this video at what cloudy white balance looks like. Now, as you can see, it's similar to the shade white balance effect, but significantly less. It's golden, but it doesn't feel like you're staring at somebody who's maybe on fire. Now, the next one is fluorescent, and you have 4 different choices: daylight, daylight white, cool white, and warm white. And so these just adjust for the type of fluorescent coloration. Fluorescent bulbs add strange colors to lighting, and for a long time after fluorescence became popular, they kind of wreaked havoc on color photography. They make things green and make people look sick. But there's different colors of fluorescent bulbs now that they've been around for a long time, and there's different types for different situations. So this allows you to counteract those different types of fluorescent bulbs. So let's take a look at what each of these 4 looks like in the setting of this video. So here's what a daylight fluorescent looks like, and as you can tell, it's a little bit warmer because daylight fluorescents have a bluer light to them. Here's a daylight white fluorescent, and actually to my eye, this looks like it's pretty much spot on in terms of white balance. This is cool white, and this is what I've been using to film these videos today. And as you can see, it adds a lot of coolness into the image because we're actually using slightly warmer fluorescence than normal here. And this is warm white, and the bulbs I'm using today are not warm white. Warm white bulbs give off a warmer, orangier color than other fluorescents, and that's why you can see a lot of blue here in the coloration, because to counteract the warmth of the warm white bulbs, you insert blue into the image coming out of the sensor. So the next one is tungsten, and tungsten's another kind of artificial light. It's the incandescent light bulbs that are wildly unpopular, even though they're better, in a lot of the America now and other parts of the world. Let's take a look at what tungsten white balance does in the setting that we're looking at here. Tungsten bulbs are very orange. The color that comes off of them is orange. And so to counteract that, it makes the scene incredibly blue. It's like we're underwater here with how much blue the camera's inserting into the image to counteract the orange that it thinks should be there from the tungsten bulb. This next one is flash white balance, and what flash white balance does is flashes have their own color to them because they're a xenon bulb. So flash understands, the white balance understands the light coming from the flash and adjusts the information coming from the sensor to account for the color of the flash. So let's take a look at what that would look like. And you can probably guess what color flash bulbs put off. If you said blue, you're right, because there's a bright orange cast to this footage because of the counteracting that's needed for the blue of the xenon bulb. This next one is CTE. CTE stands for Color Temperature Enhancement. CTE takes the predominant color in a scene and amplifies it. And what that does is it's really good for making flowers pop or sunsets super sunsetty. Basically what you're doing is you're adjusting the white balance to amplify the primary color used in a scene. The next one is manual white balance. So let's take a look at manual white balance. Now what you can do is hit Info and then use the plus and minus button pads here to change your white balance setting. So let's take a look at what that does. So I'm going to go all the way right on the amber. You can see it makes the image a lot more amber. But if we go to the blue, it makes it a lot more blue. Up to the green and over, and you can see basically what you do is wherever you put the dot, you're inserting a lot more of that color into the image. Now there's a nice thing about manual white balance. Let's go back to daylight. See here how it says Info? The fluorescent daylight color, Info? You can change the way that it looks, because not all daylight fluorescent bulbs have the same exact color. In shade, Info. Hit Info, and now you can adjust how much of an effect the shade white balance has, because shade has different amounts of blue. Where this is really powerful, these white balance settings, is if you want to artificially color an image for creative effect. If you want to make a day scene feel orange so it looks like sunset, or add orange to an evening scene so it looks even orangier. White balance can help you do that. There's a lot of creative possibilities when it comes to enhancing or changing images by adjusting white balance. This last one is K for Kelvin, and it is Kelvin temperature settings. 5,000 in Kelvin is really blue, 10,000 is really orange, and let's see how far back it goes, to 2,500. So with manual Kelvin settings, you can adjust how far on a blue to orange spectrum where you want your image to be, really blue or really orange. It gives you some additional creative control over the coloration of your image, plus it gives you a baseline color shift that you can apply. Next thing we're going to look at here is the flash modes. These are the flash modes on the K-3 II. Flash on and flash on with red eye reduction. Now, here's with the flash on and also with the flash red eye reduction, you can go down to this lower menu, and with the rear command wheel you can adjust the power of the flash from 2 stops of flash reduction up to 1 extra stop of flash power. And that's it for the flash menu on the Pentax K-3 II. Next thing we're going to look at is the custom image finishing menu right here. That's this button on the right. And now here are the different choices. Now, as we go through these, check out this little 6-sided dealie down here that shows your colors: blue, cyan, green, yellow, red, and magenta. These are the colors that it works with to create your images. And what you're going to see is that as we go through these different settings, this diagram is going to change. At any one of these, it says Info Parameters Adjust. You can go in and you can adjust different parameters. Some of them have a different set of parameters, but this is what they'll look like. And then also know that these only change your JPEG images. If you shoot RAW plus or just RAW, these do not adjust the data in the RAW image. Your RAW image will always look the same regardless of what you have these set to. So bright is good to use for settings where you have a lot of light. and it's very bright settings, and this helps to control some of the artifacts that are caused by bright settings. Natural is a good natural look. You can see here that this is giving you the most balanced of all of the hexagons that we're going to see in these menus. It's right in the middle for everything. Compare it to bright. Bright adds some yellow, it adds some blue, it adds a little bit of cyan and magenta and red, and then green is the same. So as this green line moves outwards, that's an addition to the baseline, and as it moves inwards, that's a reduction to the baseline. So here we go with portrait. Portrait adds a little bit of magenta and green and a slight bit of cyan, which gives people pleasant skin tone in the JPEGs that you're going to receive if you use the portrait color finishing option. Landscape. It adds some of the colors to make the landscape colors pop a bit more, yellows and reds and blues and things like that just make the colors in the landscape really look nice. Vibrant. Vibrant is where things start to get a little bit haywire. It's where you have the magenta, the green, the cyan are really ramped up, and then there's a little bit of an addition to red, and this makes your colors really stand out. It starts to look pretty artificial to my eye as well. Radiant is similar, but with different colors, and things really start to look artificial here. It really makes colors oversaturated. Muted reduces everything from the baseline, so your colors look less colorful. It's not black and white, but it's heading there. Bleach bypass does some really weird things. It simulates an old film technique called bleach bypass, which was used for slide film, and it had some weird effects. So bleach bypass is one of those finishing effects which can look neat, but it's not something you want to leave your camera to all the time because all of your images are going to look really strange. Reversal film. This happens to be my favorite image finishing space. It adds a little bit of in here, but we've been skipping the info button in all of these, where reversal film only gives you the ability to adjust your sharpness, and that's because in addition to changing the hexagon here, it also really increases your contrast, and you'd lose that if you'd lose that reversal film quality if you adjusted the contrast. Black and white, well, there's no image color needed, so the hexagon just goes away. You can adjust a bunch of different things. Toning is sepia versus blue. The middle is nothing, but if you go to the right, that gives you a sepia tone. To the left, it gives you a blue tone. You can add a little bit of a filtered effect. So the effect of having a green, yellow, red filter, for instance, it finds the color channels of this color filter and then makes those colors brighter in the image and leaves out the other colors or makes them darker depending on the type of filter. And then cross-processing. It doesn't show you the hexagon down there, but cross-processing is another carryover from film photography where people would take slide film and develop it as C41, as color negative film, for instance. Cross-processing simply means to take one type of film and develop it in the chemistry for another type of film. Developing color film in black and white chemistry is another example of that. So this gives you a cross-processing effect. Again, it's not one you want to leave your camera in by default. So the only button we really haven't talked about is the menu button. And in the menu button, we're going to save for the next video because it has a lot going on. It gets a video unto itself. And with that, thank you very much for watching. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm going in the right direction and that I'm producing content which is useful to you. If you have any questions or thoughts about this video or this camera, please leave those in the comments section. I'm more than happy to answer those and try to get to them fairly quickly. If you have suggestions for future videos, if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. If you are an amateur photographer who has taken photos with a Pentax K-3 II, feel free to put a link to those in the video's description. If you'd like to subscribe to find out when I have more photography-related videos coming out, feel free to do so, and then you'll find out when there's more content. And one last thing, thank you guys for watching, and take great photos.